Welcome to Ahead of the Curve podcast. Today, I have with me an Indian economist of international eminence. He is someone who has contributed to the development of economic literature with his radical ideas as being one of the most important interpretation of Piero Sraffa. His work transcends borders and invites great discussions all around the world. And he has been a professor in some of the most reputed universities, including Azim Premji University. And in the truest sense of the term, he is a footloose intellectual whose footprints and whose intellectual marks can be felt all around the world. Welcome to Ahead of the Curve podcast, Dr. Ajit Sinha.
Thank you, Ashish.
How
Thank
are
you.
you? How have the last, couple of months been? The summer,
I've
any
been, I'm, I'm all right. I've been moving around. So now I have moved to Bangalore. And
amazing?
at this time, I don't have a position, but something would work out.
Uh, Interesting, sir. I think we will first start with your work, sir. Um, because you were educated in India and then you had moved to the United States of America. With your sort of leading mentor, Piero Sraffa, how is he perceived in India as compared to the US? What are
You
these sort of
see,
yeah.
yeah, I can give you a sense of it. You see, when I was studying, at Delhi School of Economics, that's like 1980, I got there.
Hmm.
So at this time, Sukhmay Chakravarti was there. Amartya Sen was not there.
Yeah.
But Sraffa was, and Krishna Bharadwaj was there at JNU.
Hmm.
So Sraffa was a name which was he was rather hot.
Hot.
In terms of like one of the gurus somewhere, or Sraffa always had this kind of aura.
Hmm.
That's very, very brilliant man, but nobody understands him
Yeah.
properly. Uh,
Nice.
so we knew. I mean, we had heard of Sraffa, and I had heard of Sraffa, and as I told you when we were having a discussion before you started to tape it,
Yes.
that Naqvi would give Sraffa's equations as solution to Marx's transformation problem. He won't go into discussing Sraffa much in his classical political economy course. And then Sukhmay Chakravarti used to offer a course in capital theory,
Hmm.
where he was using, Steedman's Marx after Sraffa very, intensively. So but I was mainly interested in Marx in those days
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
because I had a sense that Marx's theory of surplus value and how profits are converted surplus value and surplus value surplus labor. So
Yes.
the whole system is built on the exploitation of labor. That argument, to some extent, from value to surplus to all that, I was more when because I had read a primer on Marxian economics when I was a teenager
Hmm.
by from this Moscow publication,
Hmm.
People's Publication. There was a book by Nikitin, quite a good book as a primer. So I was convinced of the argument of exploitation and explanation of profit from exploitation of labor.
Yes.
But when I got to D school, there I learned the transformation problem.
Hmm.
And then it became a serious issue for me, like how to manage this thing, because it seems that there is a contradiction. But I was very convinced that no, this has to be solved. And the Sraffian equation didn't solve it for me because it had no relation to labor.
Hmm.
So so I wanted to do my PhD on that, and that's what I did my PhD on when I went to United States, and I worked with Paul Zaremka. Went there
Yes.
purposely because somebody had told me
Sunny
that Paul
population.
Zaremka is there, and he had just converted into a Althusserian Marxist.
Fascinating.
So,
Okay.
uh, so I went there, and I thought that so in US, anyway, the Marxists were already very marginalized. The
Hmm.
US was by this time, I am talking 1985, was pretty much this rational expectation was the rage in economics departments, and
New classical economics. Yeah.
yeah, I mean Lucas and
Uh,
Barrow and all these people.
Archer. Yeah.
You see, Prescott, Kydland and Prescott, and all these papers were just coming out around
Hmm.
that time. But there were a small group of Marxists, like
Hmm.
few in New School, like Anwar Sheikh was there.
Yes.
Duncan Foley came later. He was at Vassar at that time. But then you had Rick Wolf, and then you had Stephen Resnick and Bowles and Gintis, etc. at UMass. So you had a Marxist school, and there were many. Value theory was a hot thing. And the
Hmm.
American scene was very different from Indian. In
Hmm.
India, given Krishna Bharadwaj and Chakravarti and Sen, etc.'s influence, Sraffa and Marx were not opposed. Sraffa and Marx were very close and working
Like
within the same thing.
like a standard
Where
commodity.
yes, standard commodity we'll
Yes.
discuss later. But Marx and Sraffa, I mean, Sraffa himself was quite close to the Marxists
Hmm.
uh, in his own time, and particularly Italian Marxists and Gramsci and people like that. But ideologically, he was close, but he was not never joined Marxist Party or anything. Uh,
Hmm.
but in US, after Steedman's book, Marx After Sraffa,
Yes.
this thing had become like this.
Okay.
So Sraffa had become the enemy of Marx.
Okay.
And the Marxists had to show, in a way, on all the value theory papers those days were coming out attacking Steedman or Steedman's interpretation.
Hmm.
And I go there, and in a way, I am in that milieu where I want to show that Marx was right, and basically the Sraffian interpretation from Steedman's side was wrong.
Hmm.
And I worked very hard on that, but I don't think I succeeded. So, in any case, so I was not very convinced of what I had done. I had produced a solution to transformation problem, but it was a restrictive solution, and I was not convinced of it myself. So I never published it.
Hmm.
But but I knew Sraffa, and when I was writing my dissertation, I had read Sraffa, but he was out of my reach in a way. First 40 pages I could read, but what the hell is going on was not very clear to me. Uh, but
Okay.
after my PhD, etc., I was not very convinced of Marx, and I tried Marx because I thought that I could solve this Marxist problem through philosophical angle, because I
Hmm.
knew that from economics it's not going to get solved. So I read a lot of Marxist philosophy, tried to understand, like from some philosophical perspective,
Perspective.
value could be given a different interpretation and then, understood differently. But nothing was working out because there's a serious problem there. It's as simple as that.
Hmm.
Uh, so I started to again go back to Sraffa and started. First, I learned Sraffa from Gereniani. I became a real, even though I came to know him, I
Yeah, I
came to
knew
know
getting
him
it. Yes.
quite early on because he visited SUNY Buffalo. Murray Brown was his friend. So when in 1986 itself, he visited.
Hmm.
So then I was invited to have lunch with him. So I knew him, and we
Amazing.
remained in touch throughout his life. But and I started to understand because Gereniani was the colossal figure. I mean, whatever Gereniani said about Sraffa, everybody accepted it.
Hmm.
So I started to read Gheraniani and tried to make sense of Sraffa. His paper on surplus approach economics is one of those classics which kind of, gives you what is Sraffa and how it is different. Classical
Hmm.
is different from neoclassical and all that. And I completely believe that that was the model,
Model.
and tried to now move on to that, develop that. It was just that I was in Australia and I got a chance to visit Cambridge, and I that is when they had made the archive open to public.
Hmm.
So and I knew that, so I went there only for that, and Harcourt was very, very nice to have invited me over. So there, when I started to read uh, his early
Hmm.
notes, then I realized, though I had already known that Sraffa had influenced Wittgenstein and had changed his mind. I had
Right.
read the preface of the philosophical investigation. So before going to Cambridge, I tried to read Wittgenstein and make some sense of it so that I could see what is going on.
Stuff always. Yeah.
But once I got there and I started to read his early
Hmm.
notes, then I realized that Sraffa was philosophically very sophisticated. At least his questions were more philosophical than
Yes.
economics. His way of going into things.
Nice.
So his deeper interest was philosophical rather than just solving some economics problem.
Equations.
Uh, and that is something is completely missing in Sraffian literature. From Gheraniani,
Ah.
Pesanetti, anybody you read, they had completely missed it out.
Hmm. Hmm.
They
Hmm.
had no sense of it, or they never got into it. I mean, the situation was so bad that much later, when I was invited by Gheraniani to
Hmm.
Rome to spend a week there, and I gave a couple of seminars at his, Centro Sraffa. Uh, so we went for dinner,
Hmm.
and I asked him over the dinner that, did you ever discuss Wittgenstein with Sraffa? So
Ah.
Gheraniani and I used to talk very. I was never afraid of Gheraniani. I was like a child who was precocious and not, and everybody else like good Salvadori. So these people had deference, like they
Damn.
wouldn't open
Okay.
mouth. But I would question him, talk to him, and we liked each other's company quite a lot.
Hmm.
So I asked him, so he says, no, how could I discuss Wittgenstein with him? I didn't know anything about Wittgenstein. So, I mean, so basically that gave me a sense that, look, I mean, this is too much. You have such a great mind to change Wittgenstein's mind, and
Yes.
you are not even curious to figure that out. Like, what was it? So they were not interested. They were
Hmm.
just not interested in philosophical questions. Sen was, but they were not.
They were not.
And but I realized that, okay, and I started to feel that in the there's something missing in the Sraffian
Framework.
story.
Yeah.
And so I was, but this is 1998 9 period,
Hmm.
and I had a book in my mind to write. So when I got to Collège de France, there Roger Guénerias was giving a Collège de France is a very different kind of a space. It's
Hmm.
not a university. There people just give public lectures and all.
Right.
So he was 1 year he was giving his public lecture on general equilibrium, and he asked me to close the, and what he will do is do 1.5 hours of lecturing and next 1.5 hours seminar by somebody who's expert on that area. So he had two seminars on Sraffa, last two ones.
Okay.
And before I was going to close it, and before that was Christian Vida. And so I realized that I wanted to say something new. It's a big stage, and Christian was coming before me, so I knew that he would say the basic Garaniani Sraffa model.
Nice.
So what would I say? I mean, what would
Oh,
I?
sweet.
I have nothing new to say. So I was very, very working very hard. Went into the Sraffa's book again, started to read, and that's where on page five itself, I think it's on page 5 or 6, where he says and the rate of profits must be uniform in the parentheses. And I said, why he's saying must be uniform? Because Gheraniani's interpretation was that it is the center of gravitation of classical economics, its equilibrium point. At equilibrium, rate of profit becomes so, but that is not a must
Be.
thing. It's not be must. You say rate of profit should be uniform in a competitive capitalist economy, in an equilibrium. Some kind of qualification has to be there.
Yeah.
But he didn't give any qualification and
Just a
just wrote
statement.
must be uniform. Uh, and I just stopped there because I had seen the archive and I knew how careful an author he was.
Hmm.
So he would think about a word and write a word. Then, if he thinks that maybe this word is not right, he will put another word on top of it, another word bottom of it. So, I mean, I said, he's not a guy and he's sophisticated mathematically, I mean, philosophically enough not to use this sort of a must word without any qualification for this sort of a, argument. So I started to think, and that's when I came to the idea that look, maybe his system is such that the rate of profits must be uniform. It's a
Hmm.
kind of a mathematical, result of it. I
No.
mean, it's enmeshed. It's one of the properties.
Hmm.
And so I started to work on that, etc. My first paper, which I wrote, I sent it to Geriniani, but there that time I had made a mathematical mistake. I had caught it myself, but then he came back to me after a long time and said that look, there is a problem. So we were going back and forth
Both. Okay.
is from that 9 to 2006 period. But
Okay.
I caught this thing and I kept working on it. Then I went to archive several times and I got this from INET, etc. I got some, fellowship to write this book which I
A
showed
revolution in
you.
economic theory, yes.
Yeah. So that gave me opportunity to go back and back, and then I could read the whole of archive and go through his books and
Hmm.
marginal notes and all kinds of things. So I did a thorough survey of his archive, and then I came up with this argument that well, Garaniani and all his followers were not just marginally wrong; they were fundamentally wrong in understanding
Okay.
stuff. This
Hmm.
is because if you accept my interpretation, because what Sraffa was doing, and Sen had the sense of it.
Hmm.
Among these people, younger lot who were around Sraffa, Sen was the only one who got a little bit of what was going on inside.
Hmm.
Maybe John Keats also had got the sense of it. It took Joan Robinson to get the sense of it her whole lifetime, actually. In the end, she also gets the sense. I've quoted them all, that they have came close to what I was saying.
Hmm.
And the point is that what Sraffa was doing is completely, you see, his argument is this, his understanding is this, because he wants to establish a classical frame, which
Hmm.
is in opposition to the so-called
That's
neoclassical
a good
frame.
frame. Yeah.
So the neoclassical frame, in his opinion, now I'm not saying that this is true. This is what Sraffa is establishing. you can have difference of opinion among historians of economic thought.
Yes.
And Sraffa's reading of Ricardo is the last word on Ricardo. I don't take it because I myself disagree with it. But
Hmm.
the work is amazingly amazing.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. But the point is that when he's trying to do this, what he has caught onto the classical framework, he has caught on to something which he thinks is the core of it,
Hmm.
and that is in Marx also, and he keeps repeating that the profit is a non-price phenomenon, by
Hmm.
which he basically means that it's not that. I mean, it's a physical thing. It's a thing you put so many and so much more comes out,
No
and
doubt.
that so much more turns into profit in a nominal sense, but it's really there. You can catch hold of it. So there is a surplus is something physical to some extent, but the point is that he wants to establish economics on a scientific footing.
Hmm.
And for him, the scientific footing, and in those days, quantum physics was also coming up, and he was very much into reading those literature.
Okay.
So, and he knew many physicists. He knew Eddington. He had
Wow.
discussion with Eddington. So, oh yeah, so this guy is not just an ordinary economist. He's a thinker.
Okay.
So,
Amazing.
uh,
Influence.
and he doesn't talk to too many people wasting time. He talks to Wittgenstein. He will talk to
Eddington.
only those mathematicians. That sort of a people,
Yes.
yeah, who most of ordinary people never get to. So in any case,
Uh-huh.
uh, so he was one thing he wanted to do is to say that look, scientific economics has to be built on whatever you can observe, whatever you can measure, the
Hmm.
objective. You can do it on things which you cannot observe or measure, and all the psychological data which the neoclassical economics brought in, utility, this, that, etc. The
Rationality.
whole demand side is built on the human psychology.
Yes.
But it's not that. I mean, in Adam Smith, you have a lot of human psychology, but not
Even
like,
Marx.
everywhere. All the classical economists have.
Yes.
So, and the whole gravitation, center of gravitation mechanism is built on human psychology.
Hmm.
So, so that, so, and the other, that was one thing he said, that I need to get the
Okay.
human psychology, purge it out of economics.
Hmm.
And the other was that they had brought in it because they brought in the 1870s movement, basically argued this, that the classicals could not bring in human psychology to the center of the theory.
Hmm.
This water diamond paradox they could not
Yes.
solve, is simply because they understood utility in total utility sense. They didn't have the marginal utility concept because they
Hmm.
didn't know calculus. So the marginal concept
Yes.
gave them the opportunity to bring this thing in.
Hmm.
And so Rafa's other point was that this marginal method of bringing marginal change. So marginal works on when you think of change. So
Yes.
he said, I just remove all change out of it.
Okay.
So the very foundations which the neoclassicals were saying that this is our innovation, the
Hmm.
whole idea of commodities have value because they are scarce,
Yes.
compared to what? Compared to our psychological need and demand, right?
Yes.
So the psychology is what ultimately we give value to things because
Yes.
we
Yes.
value it, right? And that is the psychological aspect. So the whole demand side comes from there, and then the method which they were using was counterfactual method of like, if I change a little bit, then what?
Yeah.
If
What?
this, then that. If this, then that. On that, so he blocked that. He said,
Hmm.
let me just completely block that and build a theory which does not have these two elements, and see if I can come up with a coherent
Hmm.
theory of value. And to do that, he had to then, develop what is standard system, standard commodity, because that's the unit of measure which is essential. And within, for doing this was a very momentous
Hmm.
discovery. And this is the at the core of the whole of Sraffa's revolution. If you remove this, there is no Sraffian revolution, and that's why he breaks from classical here. You see, Adam Smith had made this argument that if you go back and back and back in the production chain
Yes.
and collect just labor, you will ultimately get to labor versus nature stage where there
Okay.
will be no means of production, produce means of production.
Hmm.
So that's why he said that labor is the original price.
Okay.
The original price paid is labor, and that from there the labor becomes very important, both in terms of measuring things and in terms of, like, reducing any technology to just labor terms.
Hmm.
This is also what the neoclassicals and the
Hmm.
Austrians were doing. They also said that when it came to how to measure capital, that
Yes.
was the problem, because you have to have now marginal productivity of capital to
Yeah.
explain profit or interest.
Yes.
And so you had to have a measure of capital independently of prices. So
Hmm.
they thought that they could measure capital by going back and back in time and measure it on the scale of time. Because in the
Yes.
end, you can come to all the capital can be removed, and so, Bumba works and roundabout method is that there are many ways. Wixel has a different, terminology, but they're all saying that we can do that. Let's do
Yes.
that. And there, in 1942, Sraffa came up with this idea that, but there is a problem with it. And
Hmm.
the problem with it is that if industries are interconnected, that
Hmm.
like coal goes into iron, iron goes into
Wasn't it?
coal,
Yes.
then if you go back and back in time, there will be never a stage when you can get to just labor and nature. What he
Yes.
said is that there must remain a commodity residue. You can make it smaller, 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 but it will never disappear. Now, the so what it tells you is that the idea of going back to nature and man only and removing all commodities from it, the production system,
Yes.
and one in which you cannot, are completely two different visions, world,
Hmm.
because if you cannot remove this completely to
Yes.
zero commodity, then if wages go to zero, rate of profit must become infinite. So
Hmm.
even if you go into Mars, you will find that rate of exploitation will become infinite. If you go to any of these places, wages go to zero, profit becomes infinite.
Correct.
Sraffa said that if commodity residue remains, then if wages go to zero, profit must be a maximum finite profit, because there will
Okay.
be some amount of capital
Hmm.
left. So the relationship between wage and profit completely changes in the
Okay.
two worlds. And that's why he says that in his system, he assumes, he's not saying that every system must have interconnected things.
Yes.
You can have system of silos
Yes.
in which I start with labor and then I build something and build something and I build everything, right?
Yes.
A final produce, which is how most of the Austrians, Menger, etc.,
Hmm.
say that, every production basically has this thing that ultimately is for consumption. So all production is for consumption, and if you want to value capital, you have to first value what ultimately the consumption good prices, and then you can derive the prices which help you to produce that of those things, because they're indirectly useful but not directly useful. Directly useful are only consumption goods. So you have a linear narrative.
Okay.
Sraffa created that in this system, Coal produces iron, iron produces
Produces
coal,
coal.
and they have to, so it is a system in which you are going in a circle.
Okay.
There is no linear narrative in production. Is not like that, but production is like that, and that's why his book is called "Production of Commodities by Means
By
of
commodity.
Commodities."
Yes.
It doesn't say production of commodities by means of commodities and labor or some such thing. No,
Yeah.
no.
Yes.
That's to emphasize that particular point that he is talking about a commodity residue and its implication to economic theory.
Yes.
So now once that happens, that you will have a maximum rate of profit, then he came up with a hypothesis. This is 1942. He came up with the hypothesis that this maximum rate of profit
Hmm.
must remain constant when I change wages, because this was in Ricardo. When you change wage or rate of profit, prices will change of everything to
Hmm.
ensure that equal rate of profit every industry gets.
Hmm.
If the direct indirect labor time is not equal in all industries, this is transformation problem has the same problems, Marx says.
Yes.
So the prices change, and so given those prices, this maximum rate of profit is nothing but reverse of capital output ratio of an economy.
Okay.
You
Hmm.
everyday life you do it through, you already have prices and your data, so there's a vague way of doing it, but
Yes.
that's what conceptually it is.
So.
His point was that this is a technical ratio,
Hmm.
and this when you change the distribution of whatever has been produced, the surplus between wage and
Yes.
capitalist, this technical ratio should remain constant. So the
Hmm.
question was that if you do it, it change prices change. This technical ratio is a ratio of heterogeneous goods. If you put prices there, this will change also.
Yes.
And if this changes, then you got a problem. Then Sraffa has nothing to tell you new.
Yes.
So he said, okay, this is changing simply because my numerator, the scale on which I am measuring prices,
Hmm.
they are arbitrary and they are changing. All commodities are changing.
Changing.
So, is there a commodity I can construct? This is not a commodity found in the real world, but theoretically construct, which will not change when I do
Okay.
the change in the rate of profit or wages.
Hmm.
And that's what defines, which is his standard commodity.
Oh.
And every interconnected system has only one standard system, which is stated with one standard commodity. There
Yes.
aren't more than one, and that's a mathematical proof. So there is always one and only one.
Oh.
Now, once you use standard commodity as a unit of measure for wages and prices,
Hmm.
then he showed that R, which is the maximum rate of profit, will remain constant when you move from 0 to 1 of wage or profit
Yes.
change. So that establishes basic equations. So, for example, people say that Einstein has this basic equation. Everybody knows E equal to mc square. So similarly, Sraffa has a basic equation.
Yes.
That is that small r, which is rate of profit, is equal to capital R, which is maximum rate of profit, which is
Oh.
fixed,
Yes.
equal to 1 minus W. W is wages in terms of standard commodity.
Yes.
That's one equation he has, and that's his fundamental